Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise, give you the essential insights you need.
That's right, helping you stay truly informed.
And today, we are plunging into a really intense situation that just unfolded in June 2025.
This rapid conflict between Israel and Iran, escalation, de-escalation.
Exactly, and the U.S. role in brokering that ceasefire, quite surprising, really.
Central.
Yes. So our mission, as always, is to distill the key facts from the source material you've shared with us, give you a clear picture of the events, the players, the immediate aftermath.
Lay it all out.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Where do we start? The initial spark.
Yeah, let's start there. The fuse was lit June 13th, 2025. Israel launched a surprise air campaign.
And these weren't random strikes.
No, not at all. Our sources show they were highly targeted, surgical even, aimed right at key Iranian nuclear sites.
Enrichment facilities.
Exactly, and command centers linked to high-ranking military officials.
So a decapitation attempt alongside hitting the nuclear program.
Seems like it. The immediate impact in Iran was, well, it was profound. Significant casualties, major infrastructure damage.
A very direct, very hard hit. Meant to send a clear message.
Absolutely. And Iran's response, it came fast.
Almost immediate, wasn't it?
Swift. A kind of mirrored retaliation, really. They unleashed their own missile barrage.
Aimed at Israel.
Directly targeting military installations across Israel.
And the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, they took credit?
They did. Publicly claimed responsibility for, I think it was 14 missiles, launched right in the final hours before the ceasefire kicked in.
Wow, right down to the wire.
A clear signal of capability and, intent. Respond in kind.
Which brings us to the U.S. intervention. That feels like the crucial turning point here.
Definitely. How did that unfold?
Well, under President Trump, the U.S. played a really central role brokering this ceasefire. It wasn't just background diplomacy.
Actively pushing it.
Very actively. The truce officially started June 24th. Iran stopped attacks first, then Israel followed about 12 hours later. And what's fascinating here, the sources really highlight Trump's direct involvement. He personally called Netanyahu.
Our sources confirm that. A direct appeal to stop further strikes.
And the U.S. position was pretty blunt, right?
Unequivocal is the word used. They made it clear. The U.S. would not support continued military escalation.
That's huge. A major factor in getting both sides to, well, pause. Host that stance. It feels pivotal. Was that surprising given, past U.S. policy? What leverage did they really have?
That's a great question. It does seem like a notable shift. Historically, the U.S. is Israel's staunchest ally, right?
Right.
But this explicit refusal to back more escalation, it signaled perhaps a stronger desire for regional stability over just letting the conflict run.
And the leverage.
It's a mix, isn't it? Diplomatic weight, sure, but also the implicit threat or promise of U.S. support or lack thereof. By saying no more backing for escalation, Washington kind of limited Israel's perceived options. And at the same time, it maybe offered Iran a way out, an off-ramp to de-escalate without completely losing face.
Makes sense.
But, okay, let's talk about the terms of this ceasefire. Or maybe the lack of terms. This is really telling.
What do you mean?
The sources are crystal clear. The agreement was solely about stopping the shooting, cessation of hostilities, period.
So no other conditions?
None. Crucially, nothing about Iran's nuclear program, nothing about economic interests, sanctions, proxies.
Wow. So the really big underlying issues were just tabled.
Completely sidestepped. For listeners following this closely, what does that mean? A ceasefire that ignores the core conflict drivers? Was it deliberate or just crisis management?
I think it's very much the latter. It speaks volumes about the immediate pressure.
Yeah.
The main goal for the U.S., it seems, was just stop the bleeding. Stop the missiles and drones before things spiraled totally out of control.
Right.
Trying to tackle the nuclear program, sanctions, regional stuff, I would bog down talks indefinitely. These are the really intractable problems.
So pragmatic, but maybe short-sighted.
Highly pragmatic, yes. And definitely temporary. It was about stopping the direct fight, not fixing the deep geopolitical faults. And even with that narrow focus, it's worth remembering both sides apparently breached it initially.
Right, they tested the boundaries.
But ultimately complied, leading to that temporary halt. Still a fragile situation.
Very, and the cost of that direct fight. Let's turn to the aftermath, the human toll.
Yeah, this is sobering. Iran's health ministry reported over 600 deaths from the Israeli strikes.
600.
And that figure includes medical personnel, civilians. It's a staggering human cost, a really grim reminder of what happens on the ground in these situations.
Absolutely chilling. And then adding tragedy upon tragedy, what happened inside Iran afterwards?
Well, in the wake of all that, Iranian authorities launched this crackdown.
On suspected collaborators.
Exactly. People suspected of working with Israeli intelligence. Our sources point to numerous arrests, even executions.
Which obviously sparked concern. Huge concern from human rights groups. Questions about due process, coerced confessions, the usual tragic pattern in these scenarios.
Expert, this raises a really important point. Beyond the immediate conflict, what do these internal actions signal about Iran's stability, human rights?
Yeah.
How does it complicate things going forward?
It creates a really difficult internal climate, doesn't it? It likely exacerbates domestic tensions, strengthens the hand of hardliners. For our audience, this crackdown highlights the regime's perhaps paranoia about internal dissent and Israeli influence.
Especially after such a direct attack.
Precisely. And these actions, they draw international condemnation, sure, but they also suggest a hardening internal security posture that potentially makes future diplomacy on any issue even harder because trust just evaporates.
Yeah, it shows a state really grappling with both external attack and perceived internal threats.
Simultaneously.
So where does this leave things now? Post-ceasefire, what are the stances? How are Israel and Iran positioning themselves?
Well, they've adopted pretty distinct public postures.
Israel claims, mission accomplished. Objectives achieved, degrading Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities.
But with a warning.
Oh, yes. A stark warning. We're ready to resume operations if needed.
And Iran.
Iran's celebrating its heroic resistance, that kind of rhetoric. But underneath, sources suggest they seem cautious, maybe even open to returning to negotiations.
Really? Trying to avoid more escalation.
It seems that way, especially avoiding escalation with the U.S.
And the U.S. position.
President Trump has been emphasizing peace, a quick return to diplomacy, pretty clear desire to disengage from direct military involvement.
So summing that up, experts are cautious, right? They see unresolved tensions.
Deeply unresolved. Further conflict is definitely seen as possible.
And this highlights a key point from our sources. Israeli officials have indicated their campaign isn't over. That points to different long-term goals between the U.S. and Israel, doesn't it? So, for listeners tracking Middle East geopolitics, how might this specific incident where the U.S. actively pushed for de-escalation, for disengagement, how might that reshape the U.S.-Israel dynamic long-term, especially regarding Iran?
That really is the million-dollar question for strategists, isn't it? Historically, the U.S. has often been seen, rightly or wrongly, as giving Israel a green light, almost automatically backing military actions.
Right, the steadfast ally.
But this time was different. Refusing to support continued escalation, that draws a clearer line around U.S. strategic priorities, which seem focused on preventing a wider war.
So what does that mean for Israel?
It could force them to recalibrate, maybe seek more targeted actions less likely to escalate broadly, or rely more on their own capabilities, knowing that full U.S. backing isn't guaranteed in every scenario.
So not a break in the alliance, but maybe defining its limits more clearly.
Exactly, defining the limits in moments of extreme crisis. And that could profoundly shape security calculations for both countries moving forward.
Okay, so let's try to summarize this deep dive. What we saw was this incredibly rapid, aggressive escalation between Israel and Iran,
Followed by an equally swift de-escalation.
driven largely by that pivotal but maybe narrowly focused U.S. mediation role.
Right. Stop the immediate fighting.
The human cost, particularly in Iran, was tragically high.
Over 600 deaths reported.
And despite the ceasefire, the pause in hostilities, there are undeniable signs that the deeper issues, the strategic disagreements, they're all still there, simmering.
Absolutely. And the situation remains exceptionally fluid. The source material is very clear on that. The potential for renewed fighting is always there.
Especially if diplomacy fails.
If diplomacy falters, or if either side feels the other has breached this fragile truce. Which leads to a final thought, perhaps.
Okay.
Consider what it actually means when a ceasefire is explicitly called just a temporary halt. And when those core, almost existential issues like nuclear ambitions are completely left off the table in the agreement. What does that truly imply for any kind of long-term peace in such a volatile region? What pressures are just building up under the surface while those core issues continue to fester unaddressed?
It definitely suggests a peace built on very shaky ground. An expert, given that our sources mentioned both sides initially breached the ceasefire, how much faith can anyone really put in this temporary halt holding?
That's the concern. Is it just kicking the can down the road, waiting for the next inevitable spark?